Lena had worked in the hotel restaurant for almost 2 years, and though her days were long and filled with noise, she had learned to move through them with patience. Every morning she tied her hair neatly, put on her uniform, and reminded herself that this job paid her bills and kept her life steady. She never expected anything exciting to happen here, and she had stopped hoping for surprises in her daily routine. But on the afternoon of the event, something felt different the moment she arrived. The hotel staff had been preparing for a grand charity party, hosted by a well-known millionaire who often visited the restaurant and preferred everything in perfect order. Everyone called him a strict man who rarely smiled, and people working around him stayed extra careful. The managers wanted the evening to be flawless, so they selected only the calmest, most reliable workers to assist during the event. Lena was one of them. She didn't see herself as anything special, but she always kept a gentle tone with guests and never complained. And that was enough for the managers to place her on duty for the important night. The mansion where the event would take place was connected to the hotel through a long hallway filled with portraits, fresh flowers, and warm lights. When Lena walked into the main hall to set up the refreshment tables, she noticed something that instantly caught her breath. In the middle of the room, shining under golden lamps, stood a grand piano. Its surface reflected the chandelier above it, like still water. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes rest on the instrument. It felt strange to see something so close to her heart in the middle of a place that wasn't hers. She walked closer and touched the edge gently, almost like greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She had learned to play on a small keyboard when she was a child, guided by her mother, who loved music. Back then, music filled their small home late into the evenings. But after her mother passed away and responsibilities grew heavier, Lena left music behind. Life pushed her onto another path, one with bills, rent, and long hours on her feet. She did not dislike her work, but she often wondered if the soft part of her that used to belong to Melodies had simply faded. A coworker called her name, pulling her back from her thoughts. She quickly moved to her station and joined the others. Everyone was busy polishing glasses, placing trays, adjusting decorations, and whispering instructions. The atmosphere was full of excitement and pressure. Someone joked that if even one napkin was out of place, the millionaire would notice. Lena smiled lightly, but kept her focus dot as the sun began to set. The hall transformed. Professional decorators placed candles in every corner. The chef arranged dishes with precision, and the soft sound of instrumental music filled the air. Guests would soon start arriving in expensive cars, dressed in elegant clothes, ready for an evening of speeches, performances, and fine dining. Lena and the other servers lined up for a final briefing from the manager, who reminded them to stay calm, stay quiet, and stay out of the way unless needed. When the doors opened and the first guests entered, Lena held her tray steady and greeted them politely. She noticed their confident steps, their sparkling clothes, and the way they laughed easily, as if nothing in their lives ever caused worry. She served drinks and smiled, but inside she felt like a small dot in a giant, shiny world. She moved quickly but gracefully, avoiding sudden steps and keeping her mind fully present. Even though she tried to blend into the background, she couldn't help glancing at the piano every time she passed by. It reminded her of a time when she dreamed freely. In the music of her childhood, she didn't have to worry about money or survival. She could simply listen, play, and feel. Those memories moved softly inside her, like a quiet breeze dot. As more guests entered, the room grew louder. People discussed business, travel, and expensive hobbies. Some complained about small things, a drink too cold, a flower placed slightly off-center. Lena listened politely, but never let anything bother her. She had dealt with tougher days before. The millionaire arrived almost an hour later. His entrance changed the air instantly. The conversations around the hall softened, and people stepped aside to greet him. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, and his expression was as serious as always. Though Lena had seen him around the hotel many times, she had never spoken to him directly. He carried an aura that made even confident workers nervous. He walked around with his assistants, inspecting the arrangements. At one point, he stood near the piano, discussing something with a group of musicians hired for the event. His voice was calm but firm, and he spoke with authority. Lena observed from a distance while offering drinks to nearby guests. She wondered if he ever played the piano, or if it was simply part of the elegant image. He liked to maintain hours passed as the event continued smoothly. Speeches were made, laughter filled the air, and Lena moved from table to table with quiet efficiency. She noticed that the millionaire sometimes glanced around the room as if searching for imperfections. She kept her posture straight and her steps careful, knowing that workers often became invisible unless something went wrong. During a short break from serving, Lena stood near a corner of the hall, letting her feet rest for a moment. A few staff members nearby whispered casually to one another. One of them mentioned how Lena used to play music when she was younger. Another recalled hearing her hum softly while cleaning the storage room once. They spoke fondly, not knowing the millionaire had passed close enough to overhear. Lena didn't notice him listening, but he did. His eyes shifted slightly, though his expression remained unreadable. He didn't react or say anything then, but something about the conversation stayed with him. When Lena returned to serving, she felt the weight of the evening settling into her shoulders. Still, she kept moving, hoping the night would end smoothly. She approached a group of guests, offering drinks with her usual gentle smile. One of them complimented her polite manners, which made her heart warm for a moment. But she kept her focus on the job. As the event neared its midpoint, the manager told Lena to help near the stage area. She moved closer and stood near the piano once again. The golden light reflected off its surface, and the memory of sitting at her old keyboard flashed in her mind. She wondered briefly what it would feel like to play again, even if only for a moment. But she pushed the thought aside. Her life didn't have room for dreams right now. While she was arranging glasses on a nearby table, the millionaire suddenly walked toward her. She felt her heart skip a beat, unsure why he would approach a worker like her. He looked calm, but his eyes carried a sharp curiosity. He asked her a simple question. "You play the piano?" His voice was not harsh, but it held a certain expectation, as if he already knew the answer. Lena froze for a second. She didn't know what the staff had said or how much she had overheard. She nodded softly and replied that she used to play when she was younger, but hadn't touched an instrument in years. The millionaire studied her expression in silence. Something about her quiet humility seemed to interest him. He looked toward the piano and then back at her. His mind was already forming an idea, one that Lena had no way of predicting. Before she could walk away or return to her duties, he spoke again, telling her to stay close because he might need her. The words confused her, but she nodded politely. She didn't want to question him, especially not while he was still hosting the event. As he stepped away, Lena felt a strange sense of uncertainty settle in her chest. She didn't know why he asked about her music or why he seemed so curious. But she sensed that something unexpected was about to happen, something she was not prepared for. And even though she didn't realize it yet, the next part of the evening would change the direction of her life in a way she never imagined. The moment the millionaire walked away, Lena tried to steady her breathing. She didn't know what he meant when he told her to stay close, but the thought of being called again made her nervous. She returned to her usual duties, but her hands weren't as steady as before. Every time she passed by the piano, her eyes drifted toward it, wondering if it had anything to do with his sudden interest in her. She hoped he would forget about her and focus on his guests instead, but he didn't. The event grew livelier as the evening went on. The musicians played soft background music, and guests continued to enjoy themselves. Laughter filled the air, clinking glasses echoed around the hall, and the managers hurried from one corner to another to make sure everything stayed perfect. Lena tried to blend in, doing her job with her usual quiet grace. But inside, her thoughts kept circling back to the strange moment she had shared with the millionaire Dot. She kept asking herself why he seemed suddenly curious about her past with music. She didn't consider herself someone important or interesting. She was just one of the workers, someone who moved silently through the room, unnoticed by most guests. The idea that he might have plans involving her made her anxious. While she was offering drinks to a group of elderly guests, she felt someone's eyes on her. When she glanced up, she saw the millionaire standing across the hall, watching her with a thoughtful expression. She quickly looked away, pretending she didn't notice. Her heart tightened as she wondered again what he might be thinking. A few minutes later, a soft announcement echoed through the hall, inviting everyone to gather near the front for a short break in the evening program. It was the moment when the musicians were supposed to perform a small piece before a guest speaker came on stage. Lena moved to the side to avoid getting in the way, but she stayed close. As the millionaire had instructed, the musicians were preparing their instruments. But before they could begin, the millionaire suddenly stepped forward. The room quieted as soon as he appeared. He always carried a presence that demanded attention. He lifted his hand slightly, signaling the musicians to pause. The guests exchanged confused looks. Lena felt her stomach drop. She didn't know why, but something inside her sensed that his attention was about to fall back on her. The millionaire looked over the crowd and spoke in a calm but firm tone. He mentioned that he had heard something interesting about one of the workers assisting tonight. He said he wanted to see if the rumor was true. The guests leaned in with curiosity, eager to know what he meant, and his eyes turned toward Lena Dot. Her heart thumped painfully in her chest. She lowered her gaze, hoping he would pick someone else. But he raised his hand slightly and said, "You, please come here." His voice echoed clearly across the hall. A few guests turned their heads, trying to see who he's speaking to. Lena felt a cold wave of fear rush over her. She wasn't used to attention, especially not in front of so many wealthy strangers. Her hands felt heavy as she placed her tray down carefully on a nearby table. She walked slowly toward him, feeling as if each step made her smaller. When she reached the front, she stood with her eyes lowered, trying to hide her trembling. She wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Anything to avoid this moment. The millionaire looked at her with a calm expression, but his voice held authority. He asked her again, in front of everyone, if she knew how to play the piano. Her throat tightened. She nodded slightly and answered honestly, saying she used to play when she was young, but hadn't practiced in years. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Some guests looked interested, others amused. Lena wished she could disappear. She tried to explain quietly that she hadn't played in a long time and wasn't sure she remembered much. But the millionaire didn't seem to care about her hesitation. He stepped aside and gestured toward the grand piano. "Why don't you play something for us?" He said. His words hit her like a sudden wind. Her breath caught in her chest. She couldn't believe he was asking her to play in front of hundreds of guests at such an important event. She hadn't touched a real piano in years. She was terrified of embarrassing herself, terrified of disappointing the staff, and terrified of the reactions she might face. She shook her head slightly, whispering that she didn't think she could. But the millionaire remained firm. He told her it was just a simple moment of entertainment, and that she didn't need to be perfect. His tone made it sound like she didn't have a choice. The guests now watched with full attention. Some were curious, others smiling as if they expected an amusing little performance. Lena felt completely trapped. She looked at the manager, hoping for support, but even he looked afraid to interfere. No one wanted to challenge the millionaire Dot after a few painful seconds. Lena realized she had only two options: refuse and risk upsetting the most important guest of the night, or gather all her courage and try. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to nod. The millionaire stepped aside to give her space. She approached the piano slowly, feeling as if the room had grown 10 times larger. The bright lights above made her skin warm, and the polished surface of the piano reflected her anxious expression. She stood there for a moment, her hands trembling at her sides. She sat on the piano bench carefully. The seat felt unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. She placed her fingertips on the cool keys, but didn't press anything yet. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. The room was silent. Every guest watched her. The musicians stood behind her, waiting. Staff members peeked from the corners. The millionaire's eyes stayed fixed on her, unreadable. She closed her eyes for a moment and tried to breathe. Memories of her childhood drifted back to the small keyboard she learned on. The evenings when her mother would sit beside her, guiding her hands gently. Those memories felt like distant, fragile pieces of a life she once lived. She opened her eyes slowly and looked down at the keys. She pressed one single note, a soft, hesitant sound that floated into the quiet hall. She pressed another, then another. Each touch felt like a step back into a world she had forgotten, but the fear inside her didn't disappear. In fact, it grew stronger. What if she played wrong? What if she froze halfway? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? She took a deep breath and tried to steady her shaking hands. The guests waited, uncertain if she would continue. The millionaire watched with a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't name. The pressure grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, after struggling with her fear, Lena pulled her hands away from the keys. She stood up suddenly, unable to take the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She turned toward the millionaire and said softly, "I'm sorry." "I can't." A wave of murmurs spread through the hall. Some guests were disappointed, others confused. The millionaire's expression stiffened. He stepped closer and asked her why not. Lena struggled to find the right words. She whispered that she was too nervous, that she hadn't touched a piano in years, that she didn't want to ruin the event. The millionaire frowned slightly, not in anger, but in irritation. He told her she was overthinking it, and that she should sit back down and try again. His tone made it clear he expected obedience. He didn't raise his voice, but the firmness was unmistakable. Lena felt trapped once more. Saying no again would be seen as disrespectful. She hesitated, unable to breathe properly. She wasn't used to someone pushing her like this, especially not in public. The room grew tense. Guests watched with anticipation, waiting to see what she would do. The manager stepped forward slightly, but stopped when the millionaire lifted a hand. It was clear that this was no longer just about music. It was about power, control, and proving a point. Lena stood frozen, her thoughts tangled and her emotions overwhelming. She felt tears building behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from pressure and fear. She didn't want to cry in front of so many people. She tried to swallow her fear and breathe through it. Finally, she sat down again, her hands trembling more than before. She placed them on the keys once more, but her fingers shook so badly that she pulled them back again. The millionaire let out a soft sigh, impatient but not angry. He leaned slightly closer and said, "Just one melody. Nothing more. Then you may return to your work." His voice was firm. Final. Lena knew she couldn't refuse again. Not with everyone watching. Not with her job on the line. Not with the pressure weighing down on her shoulders. She looked down at the keys. her vision slightly blurred from the tears she was holding back. She didn't know how she would find the courage to play. She didn't know if her hands would even cooperate. But she also knew one thing: this moment was no longer avoidable. She had to face it. And without realizing it, the moment she placed her trembling fingers back on the piano, her life began to shift toward a path she never expected. Lena sat at the piano once again. But this time, the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than anything she had carried before. The soft lights above made the keys shine, and the quietness of the room pressed against her chest like a quiet storm waiting to break. She wished she could close her eyes and escape, even for a moment, but dozens of eyes stayed fixed on her. She could feel their curiosity, their expectation, their confusion. Some watched with friendly interest, others with quiet amusement. But every gaze made her more tense. Her fingers touched the cool surface of the keys. She tried to breathe slowly, but her breath came out shaky. She whispered to herself that this would be over soon, that she just had to try. One melody, he said. Just one. But she didn't trust herself. She hadn't played in years, and the pressure of everyone watching made her brain freeze. Even the simplest note felt impossible. Her hands trembled again, and she could almost hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The millionaire stood only a few steps away, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't kindness either. It was something in between, something that made her feel both small and strangely challenged. She didn't understand why he cared so much about this, why he insisted that she play. Maybe he wanted to entertain his guests. Maybe he thought it would be amusing. Or maybe he wanted to prove that even a simple worker should obey his requests. A soft cough from the audience snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up for a moment and saw the room filled with waiting faces. Her heart felt like it would burst. She swallowed and looked back at the keys. She pressed a single note light, unsure. The sound drifted through the hall, soft as a whisper, but it was enough to break the silence. She pressed another key, then another. Her hands felt stiff, like they belonged to someone else. The notes didn't flow the way they used to. They came out separated, hesitant. A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. She paused again, almost pulling her hands away. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run back to the kitchen, hide behind the racks of dishes, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But she didn't move. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment and searched for something familiar, something safe. And in that brief darkness, a memory appeared. She was a child again, sitting on a worn-out bench in their small home. Her mother sat beside her, guiding her fingers gently across the keys of their tiny keyboard. The sound wasn't perfect, but the warmth in her mother's voice made everything beautiful. "Don't be afraid of mistakes," her mother had said softly. "Music is not about being perfect. It's about feeling." Those words suddenly floated through her mind, like they had waited all these years just to return at this exact moment. Lena opened her eyes slowly, and something inside her seemed to settle only a little, but enough. Her hands still shook, but not as violently as before. She inhaled deeply and let her fingers rest on the keys again. She began with a soft, simple melody she had learned as a child, one she hadn't practiced in years, but could never really forget. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain. But as she continued, something changed. Her fingers, though trembling, started finding the path they once knew. The melody drifted through the hall like a quiet breeze. The room grew still. The whispers faded. Guests leaned forward slightly, surprised by the shift in her playing. The music was gentle, emotional, filled with the kind of softness that only comes from old memories and quiet longing. It wasn't perfect, not even close. Some notes wavered, some hesitated, but there was something in the way she played that touched the heart more deeply than Flawless technique ever could. The millionaire's expression changed too. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in irritation, but in curiosity. He seemed to notice something different, now a layer of truth in the music that he hadn't expected. As Lena played, her shoulders relaxed just a little. The room around her grew blurry, her fear slowly fading behind the melody that flowed from her hands. She wasn't performing anymore. She was remembering. She was returning to a part of herself she had buried long ago. The guests grew quiet. Some softened their expressions. Others seemed surprised by the depth they heard in her hesitant notes. Even the musicians behind her looked intrigued. They exchanged glances, recognizing the kind of natural feeling that couldn't be taught. The melody continued, barely loud enough to fill the hall, but somehow it reached every corner. Her hands grew steadier, moving with a mixture of caution and growing confidence. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just played the way her mother once taught her, with honesty. As she reached the middle of the melody, a certain warmth spread inside her chest. It wasn't pride. It was something gentler, a sense of returning home. She felt connected again to a version of herself she thought she had lost. When she finished the final note, the sound hung in the air for a brief moment before fading softly. The hall was completely silent. Lena lifted her hands slowly and stared at the keys. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the crowd. She forgot the pressure. All she felt was a mix of relief and quiet sadness. The memory of her mother's voice drifted through her once more, and she blinked to stop her eyes from watering. Then, as if waking from a dream, she remembered she was sitting in front of hundreds of wealthy guests. Panic flashed through her again. She stood up abruptly, stepping back from the piano as if she had done something wrong. But before she could move away, a soft sound rose from the crowd. Applause. It started small from one or two guests and then grew. Soon, the entire room was clapping. The applause wasn't loud or wild, but it was warm, gentle, and full of appreciation. It wasn't the reaction she expected. She had feared laughter or disappointment, but instead she was met with genuine admiration. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She didn't know how to respond. She bowed her head slightly, unable to look at anyone. She felt overwhelmed. The millionaire stepped closer, and she froze, unsure of what he would say. He looked at her with a softer expression than before. Not friendly, but not harsh either. More thoughtful. "You remembered more than you thought," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but she heard it clearly. Lena didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, her heart still racing. The guests continued to talk among themselves. Some said they were surprised. Others said she had hidden talent. A few even asked the musicians if they had taught her before. The musicians shook their heads, saying they had never met her. They looked at Lena with respect, recognizing that she had something rare. Lena felt overwhelmed by the attention. She wanted to return to her quiet work in the corner where no one looked at her. But before she could step away, the millionaire raised a hand slightly, signaling her to wait. The room grew quieter again. He looked at her in front of everyone and asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" His tone wasn't mocking. There was genuine curiosity in it. Lena hesitated. She didn't like speaking in front of so many people. But she answered softly, saying she learned at home from her mother. She added that she had not played in many years. A few guests murmured softly, touched by the simplicity of her words. The millionaire studied her carefully. He seemed to realize something he hadn't expected when he first asked her to play. She wasn't just a waitress who used to know music. She carried emotion in her hands, something rare, something he couldn't ignore. After a few seconds, he nodded and stepped back, signaling she could return to her duties. Lena exhaled softly in relief. She walked away quickly but gracefully, her heart still thudding inside her chest. as she moved through the room to pick up her tray again. Some guests stopped her to compliment her playing. She blushed, unsure of how to handle the praise. She responded politely, thanking them softly. But inside, she felt a storm of emotions: relief, fear, confusion, and a strange sense of awakening. She went back to serving drinks, trying to become invisible again. But she couldn't disappear so easily now. People recognized her as the girl who played the piano. They whispered about her performance. They looked at her with curiosity. Even as she worked, she kept replaying the melody in her mind. She hadn't expected her hands to remember so much. She hadn't expected her heart to feel so deeply again. Every time she walked past the piano, she avoided looking at it. Not because she feared it anymore, but because she didn't know what to do with the emotions it stirred inside her. Meanwhile, the millionaire watched her from a distance. His expression was unreadable, but his mind was no longer focused on the event. He was thinking about the unexpected talent he had just seen hidden inside a quiet worker who had lived unnoticed for years. Lena continued her duties, trying her best to calm her racing thoughts. But deep inside, something had changed. A door she once closed had opened again, quietly and gently. She didn't know yet what that meant. All she knew was that her life had shifted a little the moment her fingers touched those keys. The evening of the party arrived with a quiet kind of tension that hovered in the air like mist. The house looked even grander under the soft glow of lights that wrapped around the tall pillars and framed the large windows. People began arriving long before the actual starting time. Cars lined up outside, and the sound of doors opening, footsteps, and light chatter floated across the courtyard. Inside, the main hall had been decorated with warm golden tones. Strings of fairy lights hung from the ceiling, creating a soft shimmer throughout the room. In one corner stood the grand piano, black, glossy, and polished so well that it reflected anything near it like a mirror. It was impossible not to look at it. Even someone who didn't know music would feel that this instrument carried importance. She arrived early, though she had not planned to. Her nerves simply didn't allow her to stay home any longer. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, but neat enough to make her feel presentable. She had tied her hair in a low braid, mostly to avoid touching it out of nervousness. Her hands felt cold, and every few minutes she rubbed them together, hoping it would ease her worry. The kitchen staff was already busy. Trays of drinks were being filled, appetizers arranged on silver platters, and instructions were being spoken quickly. She was assigned to assist near the bar area, carrying drinks toward the guests as they arrived. She tried to focus on the task, but the piano kept pulling her attention. Every time she walked past it, she slowed down. Her fingers almost twitched. As if they remembered a feeling her mind kept trying to forget. She had played before a long time ago, so long that she feared she might have lost every bit of skill she once had. The millionaire arrived last, walking in with a kind of confidence that made everyone look his way. He wore a dark suit, sharp and perfectly fitted. His voice carried across the hall, loud enough for everyone to hear, yet clear and smooth. He greeted his guests with ease, moving from one group to another like someone used to attention. He noticed her almost immediately. His eyes lingered on her for a moment, not in a judgmental way, more in a curious one. She felt her heart skip, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe because she knew he remembered what he had said to her earlier, that she would play tonight. She hoped he had forgotten. She prayed he had said it only to tease, not expecting her to take it seriously. But of course, as the night continued, it became clear he had not forgotten anything. The guests began filling the hall with laughter and conversations. Music played softly through speakers, creating a warm atmosphere. She moved around carrying trays, careful not to appear distracted. She tried blending into the background, but the millionaire kept glancing her way, as though he was waiting for the right moment. At one point, she passed by him as she collected empty glasses. He smiled a small smile, but enough to show that he was aware of her nervousness. "Don't worry," he said softly as she walked by. "Just wait. I'll call you when it's time." Her breath caught in her throat. She nodded quickly and moved away. Time seemed to slow down after that. She felt as if every step she took echoed loudly in her ears. The piano was so close to the center of the hall that she couldn't avoid it. Guests kept admiring it, talking about past concerts, and sharing stories of musicians they remembered. She wondered if any of them ever felt the same fear she did, that strange mixture of excitement and terror that came from being seen. The millionaire eventually took the center of the room, raising his hand slightly to gather attention. The guests quieted one by one, turning toward him. His voice echoed warmly through the hall as he welcomed everyone formally. Then he said it. "Tonight, I want to share something special with all of you. Something unexpected. We have someone among us with a hidden talent, a talent she herself might have forgotten." Her heart dropped. "Where is she?" he asked, scanning the room, and then his eyes landed on her. "There she is. Come forward, please." Every head turned. Every eye followed. The tray in her hands suddenly felt too heavy. She swallowed hard, quietly set it down on the nearest table, and walked toward the piano on weak knees. Her vision blurred for a moment as embarrassment, fear, and pressure mixed into something overwhelming. The millionaire stepped aside, offering the spotlight to her. She stood beside the piano, unsure of what to do, how to act, how to stand. "She works harder than anyone," the millionaire continued, speaking to the guests but looking at her. "But what most of you don't know is that she also carries a gift. Tonight, I want her to share it with us." Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Sir, I haven't played in years. I'm not sure I can." He didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, as if he understood more than she assumed. "Just sit," he said gently. "Let your hands remember." Her legs felt weak as she lowered herself onto the piano bench. The smooth surface of the keys shone under the lights. Her hands hovered above them, trembling. She could hear the guests whispering softly among themselves. The room felt heavy. She closed her eyes. For a moment, everything went silent. She didn't think about the guests. She didn't think about the millionaire or the huge room filled with strangers. She didn't think about the fear pulsing through her. She thought only of the piano. The first time she ever touched one. The first time she played a full melody. The first time she felt music wrap around her like warmth. Her fingers lowered slowly, hesitant, unsure, and touched the keys. The sound that came out was soft, almost fragile, but it was enough. Her hands moved to the next notes, then the next. The melody unfolded like a memory, waking up after a long sleep. She knew she wasn't playing perfectly. Her hands lacked confidence, but the tune carried emotion. It carried a story, and everyone in the room felt it. The conversations that had filled the hall earlier faded into silence. People leaned forward slightly, drawn in by the unexpected softness in her playing. No loud gesture or showy performance, just raw feeling. The millionaire watched her closely, his eyes reflecting something thoughtful. He wasn't smiling arrogantly. He wasn't amused. Instead, he seemed moved almost as deeply as everyone else. As her fingers glided over the keys, she began remembering more. Patterns returned. Confidence grew, slowly but noticeably. Her breathing steadied, and her shoulders relaxed as she allowed herself to get lost in the music. The melody rose and fell gently, like waves brushing ashore. When she finally played the last note, her fingers lingered on the keys for a second. She didn't open her eyes immediately. She simply sat there, overwhelmed by the strange mixture of relief and disbelief. When she finally looked up, the room was silent. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud at first, more like a rising wave, but soon it filled the hall. People clapped with genuine excitement, admiration, and surprise. Some even stood up, cheering her on. Her heart raced. But for the first time that night, it wasn't out of fear. She stood from the bench, feeling a kind of happiness she hadn't felt in years. Her eyes were slightly teary, but she blinked quickly, not wanting attention to drift toward her emotions. The millionaire stepped forward, clapping with the rest. When he reached her, he leaned in slightly and spoke in a calm voice meant only for her. "Told you," he said. "Your hands remember." She didn't know what to say. Words felt too small. So she simply nodded. The applause slowly died down, but the looks she received from the guests did not. They were full of admiration, curiosity, and warm surprise. Some approached her immediately, wanting to compliment her or ask questions. She tried answering politely, but the rush of emotions made it difficult to process anything. She moved aside to let the party continue, feeling both seen and overwhelmed. But as the night went on, she realized something even more surprising was yet to come. For the first time in years, someone had not only seen her talent, they had believed in it before she did. And that belief was about to change everything. The applause from her performance stayed in her mind long after it faded from the room. Even as the guests returned to their conversations, as music resumed through the speakers, and as laughter filled the hall again, she remained in a quiet, stunned state. It felt as if her whole world had shifted in a matter of minutes. For so long, piano had been a distant memory, something she convinced herself she no longer needed. But now, hearing those notes come from her own hands, seeing the way people reacted, something inside her woke up. She moved away from the piano to continue her usual work. But her steps felt lighter, almost as if she was floating. She carried trays again, but this time people looked at her differently. Guests she had served without notice earlier were now smiling at her, greeting her warmly, even congratulating her. Some asked if she was a professional musician. Others asked where she had learned to play. She only offered small smiles and short answers, too overwhelmed to explain her past. The millionaire watched all this from a distance. He didn't interfere or draw attention to her again. Instead, he spoke with his guests as usual, but every now and then, his eyes drifted back to her, as if ensuring she was handling the sudden attention well. She could still feel the warmth in her hands from the piano keys. It was strange, almost magical, that something she had ignored for years could feel familiar again so quickly. As she passed near the piano later, she paused for a moment. The hall lights reflected across its surface just like earlier, but now she felt something new. She felt connected to it again. She reached out and touched the edge, not the keys this time, just the smooth frame. A quiet breath escaped her, a breath filled with memories she had locked away long ago. Before she could step away, one of the guests approached her, a lady with kind eyes and a warm smile. She introduced herself gently and complimented her playing. "You touched the whole room," the lady said softly. "You know that, right?" She shook her head modestly. "I was nervous. I just played what came to my mind." "That's exactly why it was beautiful," the lady replied. More guests slowly gathered around her. It wasn't a crowd, but enough people to make her feel small again. Still, their words were kind. A man spoke about how her playing reminded him of concerts he had attended years ago. Another mentioned that the emotion in her music felt genuine, rare. She listened quietly, unsure how to respond to praise. She wasn't used to it. She wasn't used to being seen at all. After a few minutes, the millionaire stepped forward, gently guiding the guests back to the main entertainment of the evening. He didn't say much, but his timing rescued her from becoming too overwhelmed. She mouthed a silent "thank you" to him as he walked away, and he nodded in return. Later in the night, when most of her tasks were done, she finally had a moment to step outside onto the balcony. The cool air brushed against her skin, calming her. She leaned on the railing, letting the night breeze settle her racing mind. The city lights stretched out below, the large estate like glittering stars fallen to the ground. She could hear faint sounds at the party behind her, the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, but out here, everything felt peaceful. She closed her eyes and replayed the melody she had performed earlier. Her fingers moved slightly, as if remembering the pattern on invisible keys. She didn't hear footsteps behind her, but she sensed someone join her on the balcony. When she opened her eyes, the millionaire stood beside her. Not too close, not too far, just enough to acknowledge her presence without making her uncomfortable. For a moment, neither spoke. "You did well," he said finally. His voice calm and sincere. She lowered her gaze. "I wasn't sure I could do it." "I knew you could," he replied. "Sometimes people forget what they're capable of until someone reminds them." She looked at him with gentle confusion. "Why did you push me to do it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the view, hands resting lightly on the railing. "You work here quietly," he said after a moment, "doing more than most people notice. But I noticed the way you hesitated every time you passed the piano during previous events, the way your eyes lingered on it, the way you stopped for a second too long when you thought no one was watching." Her face warmed with embarrassment. She hadn't realized anyone had observed her so closely. "It wasn't just curiosity," he continued. "It was longing. So I guessed you had a connection to music, maybe a buried one." She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to play? A long time ago. Life got busy. I didn't think I was good enough anymore." He nodded slowly. "Life does that. It makes us put away the parts of ourselves that don't seem necessary at the moment. But that doesn't mean those parts disappear." She let his words sink in. They felt heavier than she expected heavy with truth. "What you did today," he added, "was brave." She shook her head lightly. "I was scared." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's the choice to move despite it." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. His words felt almost too kind, too thoughtful. She had expected him to be distant like most wealthy people, cold, reserved, detached. But he wasn't. He spoke with sincerity she couldn't ignore. I didn't want to embarrass you," she admitted quietly. He let out a soft laugh. "Embarrass me? You made the night unforgettable." Her cheeks warmed again. He shifted slightly, turning to face her more directly. "Can I ask something?" She nodded. "Why did you stop playing?" A long silence followed. The lights from the hall reflected softly on her face as she struggled to form an answer. "I didn't stop because I wanted to," she said finally. "Life changed. Responsibilities came first. I couldn't afford lessons anymore, and eventually, the music just slipped away." He listened quietly, not interrupting. "I told myself it didn't matter," she continued, "that it was just something from the past. But tonight, it felt like I found a part of myself again." The millionaire smiled faintly. Maybe that part was waiting all this time. A gentle breeze brushed past them. She exhaled slowly. "I'm grateful you believed in me, even when I didn't." "You made it easy," he replied. As the two stood on the balcony, the noise from inside faded even more, leaving them in a bubble of quiet understanding. There was no tension, no awkwardness, just a peaceful sense of connection neither had expected. After a moment, he spoke again. "I want to show you something before you leave tonight, if you're willing." She looked at him with curiosity. "What is it?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Something related to music. Something I think you'll understand." Her curiosity grew, but she didn't press for details. "Okay," she agreed softly. "I trust you." For a moment, his expression softened further, almost as if her words meant more than she realized. "Good," he said. "Finish your tasks. When the party ends, wait near the piano." She nodded. The millionaire left the balcony, and she stayed for a moment longer, letting her heart settle. The night continued, but something felt different, now brighter, fuller, more meaningful. She moved through her remaining duties with a calm she hadn't felt earlier. Guests thanked her. Some complimented her playing again, but she no longer felt overwhelmed. By the time the last guests began leaving, she found herself standing near the piano as she had promised. The room was quieter now, the decorations still glowing softly, the air gentle and warm. She didn't know what the millionaire planned to show her, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, her life was quietly, beautifully shifting, and the music was only just beginning to return. When the last guests finally stepped out of the grand hall, the atmosphere shifted into a calm, almost intimate quiet. The once lively room now glowed softly under the warm lights, with only a few staff members cleaning up the scattered glasses, plates, and decorations. She stood near the piano just as she had been asked, her hands lightly resting in front of her, her heart steady but curious. The piano seemed even more beautiful in the dimmed lights, as if waiting for something. She took a slow breath, feeling both anticipation and wonder settle inside her. The millionaire entered the hall a few minutes later, walking with a relaxed confidence that felt different from earlier. The formality of the event had faded, leaving a quieter, more genuine presence around him. He was now without the usual crowds around him, without the businesslike posture, and without the need to impress anyone. He stopped a few feet away from her and gave her a gentle nod. "Thank you for waiting," he said. She returned a small smile. "You said you wanted to show me something." "I do," he replied. "Follow me." He led her through a side hallway she had never entered before. She had worked at the estate for several months, but this area was unfamiliar. The hall was quieter and lined with framed photographs, most of them black and white, filled with musicians, orchestras, and concert halls. She paused to look at a few, her footsteps slowing. "You like those?" he asked, noticing her interest. "They're beautiful," she replied softly. "You must really love music." A small smile appeared on his face. "It was part of my life long before any of this, long before business or wealth. Music used to be my first love." She looked at him with surprise. "You played?" He nodded. "For years. But life took me in a different direction." She understood that more than he realized. They walked to the end of the hallway, where he opened a door she had never seen before. Inside was a smaller room, warm, quiet, and filled with soft lighting. The moment she stepped in, she noticed something instantly. Another piano, but it wasn't grand and polished like the one in the main hall. This one was older, wooden, a little worn on the edges, and clearly loved over the years. The bench had slight marks, the pedals had lost some shine, and the keys carried tiny scratches that hinted at long hours of practice. It felt alive. "This was my first piano," he said as he closed the door behind them. She stared at it with a gentle sense of awe. "It's beautiful." "It's important," he corrected softly. "This room is where I practiced as a child, where I learned my first melody, where I grew up with music." She walked slowly toward the piano, her steps quiet and careful. When she reached it, she ran her fingers along the smooth wooden surface. "Why did you show me this?" she asked, turning toward him. "Because," he said, "I saw something in your playing tonight. Something real. Something people don't find easily." Not even professionals. She felt her breath catch. I just played what I felt. And that, he replied, is exactly what music should be. He moved a little closer, but still kept a respectful distance. I don't want you to think I brought you here to pressure you. I brought you here because I want to offer you something I think you deserve. Her heartbeat sped up with nervous curiosity. He gestured toward the piano. Sit, she hesitated. Here? Now? Yes, he said. I want you to feel it. Not like you did in the hall, where eyes were on you. Here, it's just the music and you. A long silence settled between them. She finally nodded and slowly sat on the worn bench. The wood creaked softly under her weight. Her hands hovered over the keys, unsure. Play whatever comes to your heart, he said. Her fingers touched the keys gently. They felt different from the grand piano earlier, warmer, softer, somehow more intimate. She pressed a single key, letting the sound fill the room. It was deeper, carrying an old charm that felt comforting. She closed her eyes. This time, she didn't feel watched. She didn't feel judged. She didn't feel nervous. She felt free. Her fingertips began forming a melody, a new one, unplanned, spontaneous. Soft, gentle, and honest. The notes floated through the room, weaving emotion into the quiet air. She didn't think about technique or perfection. She simply played what her heart whispered. The millionaire stood still, listening with full attention. His expression softened completely, touched by the purity of her music. As she played, she remembered things she thought she had forgotten, the joy of discovering a new tune, the feeling of losing herself in notes, the quiet peace that came from creating something with her hands. The melody rose a little, then fell again like a sigh. When she finished, she didn't open her eyes immediately. She let the last note linger in her mind. When she finally looked up, he was smiling, not the polite smile he used for guests, but a genuine one. That, he said quietly, was beautiful. Her eyes softened. Thank you. He took a breath before speaking again, as if choosing his words carefully. There's something I want to ask you, he said. She sat upright, unsure what direction this was heading. What is it? She asked. He stepped closer, though still maintaining a gentle distance. I want you to consider something bigger than tonight. Her heart thumped with anticipation. I want you to start playing again, he said. Not just for me, not just for parties, just for yourself. I'll help you if you want. Lessons, time to practice, access to this piano whenever you need. She blinked, stunned. You would do that? He nodded. Only if you want it. I'm not asking you to leave your work or change your life overnight. I'm only offering support. I see potential in you. Real potential. And I think you deserve a chance to explore it again. She felt emotion rise in her chest. Unexpected and overwhelming. No one has ever said something like that to me, she whispered. Then let me be the first, he replied gently. She looked at the piano, then at him. But why me? His answer came softly, without hesitation. Because your music moved this whole house tonic.